what happens after you put an image on your page and then realize you need to edit the image somehow? For example, let me go to page 3. I'll use Command J or Control J on Windows. Press 3 and enter, and then I'll select this map and zoom in on it to 200% with Command 2 or Control 2 on Windows. Now I'm looking at this map and I'm realizing that something's wrong. This dashed line goes on top of the image, and that just looks weird. Well, I can go to Illustrator and open the file and change it, but since I'm looking at it in InDesign, it's far easier to use a feature called Edit Original. You can get to Edit Original in 3 different places in InDesign. First, you could go to the Edit menu and choose Edit Original, or you could go to the Links panel and click on the Edit Original button, or my favorite way, simply Option double-click or Alt double-click in Windows on the image and it opens it in the original application, in this case Illustrator. Option double-click, and there I am. I'm in Illustrator and it's selected for me. Now I'll do some cleanup here. I'll select that image, I'll bring it to the front using a keyboard shortcut. Why don't I change the color of this to something other than that drab green, maybe make it a little bit more bright green. Sure, that's exciting. And I could change all sorts of other stuff about this image, but I'm going to leave it alone just like that. I'll press Command S for save, then it's going to give me a warning. I'll just click OK to go past that. And now when I go back to InDesign, I'll see that it updates immediately. Ready? Here we go back to InDesign using the application switcher, Command Tab on Mac or Alt Tab on Windows, and boom, it updates. Isn't that amazing? Because I used Edit Original, it was watching for my change. I don't have to go back to the Links panel and click on the Update button, it just automatically updates for me. By the way, InDesign actually has no idea what the original application is for these images. It relies entirely on the operating system for this information. Basically, Edit Original is the same as just double-clicking on the image in a folder. Sometimes it opens in the wrong program. If you find a file opens in a program you didn't want or didn't expect, you can control that by using Get Info on the Macintosh or Properties in Windows. Just go to the Finder on the Macintosh and click on the file and choose Get Info from the Macintosh's file menu. Or on Windows, you can right-click on a file and choose Properties. In either place, you can control which application will open your document. When you import an image, it often doesn't appear at the correct size on your page. For example, let me create a new frame and put a picture in it. I'll use the Frame tool to drag out an area on my page, and then I'll use the Place command to put a picture into it. I'm going to choose this image number 12, click Open, and you'll see that the image is too big for this frame. In fact, you can see that even easier if I select the Direct Selection tool and click and hold down on the image itself. When you click and hold with the Direct Selection tool, you can actually see the part that's cropped out ghosted back. When you let go of the mouse button, the cropped area disappears. So what do you do about that? We'll explore scaling in the chapter on transforming objects, but let me quickly show you one feature which really comes in handy, especially when importing images into a template that someone's built. With either the image or the frame selected, I can go to the Object menu and choose Fitting. The Fitting submenu gives me a number of options, including Fit Content to Frame, which will actually scale the image, even if it has to scale it disproportionately to fill that frame. Let me undo that and show you some of the other ones. Object, Fitting, Fit Frame to Content does just the opposite. It makes the frame larger or smaller to fit the picture. Now the frame is so big that none of the image is cropped out. I'll undo that and go back to the Fitting. Instead of using the Object menu, I'll right-click on the image to get the same submenu. Center Content is obvious, it just centers the image in the frame. Fit Content Proportionally is interesting because it'll actually scale the image so that it fills the frame. It won't do it proportionally, but it won't necessarily fill the frame. See, this part of the frame down here is empty. I'll undo that and choose my favorite, which is Fill Frame Proportionally. And Fill Frame Proportionally scales the image proportionally, right? So it doesn't get it all squeezed or stretched, and it fills the frame so that there's no empty parts of the frame, even if it means cropping out part of the image. Like this part of the image over here is cropped out. I'll click and hold and you can see that ghosted back part. Let me show you one other shortcut that they snuck into CS3. If I use the Selection tool and click on the image and the frame, I can actually double-click on a side handle or corner handle, and it fits the frame to the image automatically for me. That works for pictures or text frames. For example, this text frame up here is larger than it needs to be, and if I simply double-click on that corner handle, it snaps to fit the text inside the frame. That's pretty cool. Let me show you one other fitting feature that they put into CS3, and that is frame fitting options. This frame over here is part of a group, so I need to use the direct select tool to click in between these columns on that frame. Now that frame is selected, I can right-click on it and choose frame fitting options. Or you can choose this from the object menu. Either way, the frame fitting options dialog box lets me control cropping, positioning, and fitting all in one place, even for an empty frame. For example, in this case, I'm automatically going to crop off a portion of the image, and then center that image in the frame, and then fill the frame proportionally, automatically, as soon as I import an image. I'll click OK, I'll go to the File menu, and choose Place, and in this case, I'm going to grab this image number 13 with the hands. Click Open. The image is imported, it fits the frame, it crops off a little bit of the edge, and it centers it right in the frame for me. You certainly don't have to make your images fill your frames or your frames fit your images, but it's often helpful, especially when trying to lay out a document or template quickly. Okay, now that we've talked about frames, let's get back to the images themselves, and specifically using images that have transparent areas or clipping paths. What if you need an area of an image to be transparent? For example, why don't I go use File, Place, and choose image number 13, and I'm going to place it right here into this blank frame. I need to click between the column guides to get to that frame beneath there. Now, what if I wanted this black area around the hands to be transparent so I could see through it? In the past, this effect has typically been created using a clipping path, and InDesign can do that, but it can also see and manage native transparency in images too, which often leads to much better results. First, let's look at the clipping path option. There's a path hiding inside this image. In fact, if I option double click on the image, we can go look at it. Remember, option double click is the same as Edit Original. This opens that image in Photoshop, and if I click on the Paths panel, we can see that there's a path around that image called Path Around Hands. If I switch back to InDesign, I can select the image using the Direct Select tool. I pressed A to get the Direct Select tool and then clicked on the image. Now I can go to the Object menu, choose Clipping Path, Options. To get that path, to pull it out and turn it into a clipping path, I choose Photoshop Path from the Type pop-up menu, and then pick the path. If there were more than one path in the Photoshop file, they would all show up here, but in this case, there's simply one path. I'll click OK, and you can see that the background goes transparent, the clipping path is added, and if I zoom in here, I can actually see through all the way to white. White's not very interesting, so then I use the Direct Select tool to select that back frame, choose the swatch panel, and fill it with some color, like cyan. I'll be talking more about filling and stroking images in a later chapter. Let's just focus on the image here. To be honest, there are two main problems with clipping paths. The first is, and you can see this really clearly if we zoom in even more, there's always a sharp edge around them. Clipping paths are never soft. Very sharp edges around their corners. You can't get a soft edge. The second problem is, they're a real hassle to make. I hate drawing clipping paths. It's terrible. So, let's use a different feature. Let's use actual transparency. I'll zoom back out here so we can see the whole thing. I just press Command 2 or Control 2 on Windows to zoom back to 200%. And I'm going to replace this image with a different image. I'll click on the image, go to my Links panel, and replace this image using the Relink button to a new image called Hands Silhouette. And my Hands Silhouette image is different. My Hands Silhouette image has no clipping path. It has real transparency. I'll option double click on this image. Here's that same image in Photoshop. You can see there's no clipping path in the Paths panel, but in the Layers panel, there's the image with a layer mask, and the layer mask is masking back the background all the way to transparency, all the way to that checkerboard transparency. InDesign can read that native transparency in Photoshop PSD files, in PDF files, and Adobe Illustrator files. So when we go back to InDesign, we can see that the transparent areas are truly transparent. And if I zoom in here, we can see that they're actually anti-aliased into the background. I'll go to View, Display Performance, High Quality Display, so you can see the really high quality here, that the pixels are anti-aliasing into the background, and the background color is from the InDesign object. That's real transparency. Transparency effects like this are hot. I mean, they're cool. I mean, they're awesome. Use them! Sometimes you need to colorize an image, that is, apply a color to an imported image. You can do this in InDesign, but there are conditions. It has to be a pixel-based image, no Illustrator vec files. It has to be a grayscale image, can't already be in color, and there cannot be any transparency in the image. So it has to be a flattened grayscale image, like a TIFF or a PSD file. I'll show you how it works. I've opened the Java Code magazine document, and I'm going to go to the previous spread by pressing Option Page Up or Alt Page Up, and I'm going to place my grayscale image into this frame. So I'll select that frame, choose Place, and pick my grayscale image, DSC19 Gray. Click Open, and the grayscale image is imported into that frame. Now how do I colorize it? Well, you use the Swatches panel. I'll click on the Swatches panel, and here's where all my color swatches are. I'll be talking about filling and stroking and making new colors in later movies, but for right now, I simply want to fill with a color. So I'm going to make sure the fill icon is on top, and then I'm going to click on a color. And the result is ugly. What I'm getting is more like a really terrible looking duotone than colorizing the image. That's not very pleasant at all. So what's the trick? How do I colorize the image itself? Well, the trick is what is selected. In this case, I had selected the frame with the selection tool. That means I was colorizing the frame, not the picture. I'm going to set that back to paper, so it looks a little bit more pleasant again. And this time I'm going to use the direct selection tool to click on top of the picture. Now I've selected the picture, not the frame. And now when I click on a fill color, it colorizes the picture. That's a little extreme, so let me scroll to the bottom of the swatches panel and I'll choose this nice subtle green color. That's nice, that's much better. I've colorized the picture in the frame. I can't tell you how many people have emailed me saying they can't figure out how to achieve this effect. Now you know. Just use the direct selection tool. Not only can InDesign read transparency in your images, it can see the layers inside your Photoshop and Illustrator files. That means you can actually turn on and off layers in your files from within InDesign without ever going back to Photoshop or Illustrator. Very cool. Here's how it works. I have my Java Code magazine publication open from my exercise files, and I'm going to go back to the first page of the document by clicking on the First Page button in the lower left corner of the document window. Now this background image is a Photoshop file. It's a native PSD Photoshop file, and this Photoshop file has layers. I can see those layers by selecting the image with the selection tool, going to the Object menu, and choosing Object Layer Options. That's where the feature is hiding. I'm going to move this out of the way so we can see it work a little bit better. I'll turn the Preview checkbox on so I can actually see the changes I'm going to make without closing the dialog box. And now here's all the layers. These are the layers that are in the Photoshop document. And I can scroll through them. Text layers could be in there, adjustment layers, effect layers, all kinds of cool stuff could be in there, and InDesign can see them. For example, if I don't like that teacup in the image anymore, I can just turn it off. It's obvious, right? Just click on that little eyeball, and it goes away. If I decide I like the teacup but don't want the fan, turn that back on, and turn the fan off. It's as simple as that. If you know how to use the layer comps feature in Photoshop and you've created multiple layer comps, you can even choose those from this dialog box as well. There's one feature I don't want to forget here. That's when updating link. This is a little confusing, so bear with me. This has to do with what happens to your Photoshop files when they get edited. If you go in and edit the Photoshop file and then later come back to InDesign and update that modified file. If this is set to keep layer visibility overrides, then all the work that you've done here turning on and off the layers is remembered. But if this gets set to use Photoshop's layer visibility, then any work you've done in this dialog box, as soon as the modified image is updated in InDesign, it all gets thrown away. So I usually leave this set to keep layer visibility overrides, but it's something you need to pay attention to. There's so many ways to use this feature. For example, you know I read a lot of computer books that have before and after images, right? So now, instead of creating two different images, I just save a before and after as two layers in one file. I import it, duplicate it, change which layers are visible in each one. So now I keep track of half the number of files that I used to, and it's much easier to go back and make changes when necessary. I just love this feature.